Hey, I'm Angela Walters from quiltingismytherapy.com, and this is the Free Motion Challenge, Quilting Along Borders and Backgrounds, where we're working through a series of videos learning some great border designs and how to use them to highlight areas in our backgrounds. We've already seen wavy lines, we've already seen the herringbone, and now we're going to touch on your best quilting friend, echoing. Echoing is just quilting the same shape a space away from the previously quilted shape or the block. We're going to use echoing to really highlight the sides of our block and fill it in with a curvy wishbone. Then we'll talk about how to use the wishbone itself as a filler in between other quilting designs. So we better get to it. On this quilt, I'm going to quilt from the center all the way off the edge. We're going to use the quilting to create the border that we want to fill in. I'm going to echo the side of my border, and I'm going to use about a 1/4 inch spacing. By running my foot along that seam, it's going to give me about a 1/4 inch between the edge of the seam and the needle. We have to echo first because that's going to give us the boundary that we're going to quilt our wishbones in. Now the spacing you use for your echo lines really depends on how big the border is and what your preferences are. And I'm going to keep going until I run into the edge of the quilt. At this point I could break threads and reposition, but instead I'm going to travel along the edge and work my way back, echoing the other side of my border. Of course, you don't have to use a ruler to do this. If you wanted, you could use your walking foot to add the echo lines, then change to your free motion quilting foot and do wishbones. One thing I want to point out is that I prefer quilting vertically. I really feel like I can use my body's momentum to help push and pull the quilt. The limitation to that, however, is sometimes I can't exactly see where I'm going. If that seems just a little too tricky, go ahead and rotate the quilt. Do whatever it takes to make it easy for you. Now that I have my echo lines, I'm going to start quilting my wishbone. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quilt a line that angles down in the direction I'm heading. But as soon as I start to approach the echo line, I'm going to loop back and then angle down the opposite side. When I'm quilting the wishbones, I'm starting my loops before I get to the edge. I don't want to wait till I run right up to the line and then try to start my turn, because that means I'm going to get a little cut off. So as I'm quilting along and I see that other line coming, that's when I'm going to begin my curve so that it stops just short of my quilted line. Now one thing that will really help you as you're quilting is to keep these lines parallel. As I start to angle down to the opposite side, I'm going to quickly look back at that previously quilted line and make sure that it's somewhat parallel. That's what's going to help you progress and keep this line consistent. Depending on how dense you want the quilting, you can make your lines more or less steep. What it's going to do is make those loops closer or further apart, and that's really going to change the density of the design. You might find that your wishbones have a bigger loop or a smaller loop. That really doesn't matter. Just focus more on keeping those lines parallel. As you're quilting, you'll need to reposition your hands often. And I find that the best place to do that is right after I finished a loop where those lines touch. That means I can stop or reposition my hands and continue on. It kind of helps hide any bumps or bobbles that might happen from starting or stopping. I will say the one thing that really helped me get the hang of this design was I think of it like a cursive L. Relating a quilting design to something you already know in real life will make it a lot easier to learn it because your brain can already start learning that path. And again, I'm quilting these vertically because that's how I prefer to quilt. If you'd like, you can quilt it horizontally. Make sure to try both directions. You might find that one feels better than the other. Once I'm done quilting the area, I'm going to put a couple echo lines on each side of it just to help define that strip. And of course, you can use your ruler or freehand it or use your walking foot. It doesn't matter. I've said it several times in this video series, but a design doesn't have to be difficult to be impactful. Adding echo lines is a great way to add an elegant look to our quilting, but also to highlight the block that it's around. And it's something I do a lot. On the challenge quilt, we're actually not going to be turning the corner with this wishbone design, but it's not difficult to do. So if you have questions about that, it's going to be in the free downloadable tip sheet, which you can find a link to below. That'll have quilting diagrams, plus I'll show you how to take that design around the corner. Unlike a sewing machine, the biggest issue I have is that I can't easily change the orientation of the quilt. That means when it comes to quilting these vertical borders, I've got to use a few tricks to make it efficient. Instead of quilting one long straight line down the whole quilt, I'm going to go until I'm about to run out of room, and then I'm going to transition to the other side by quilting a pointed end to my echoing. And then go back up the direction I came. Now that I have that defined space, and I'm going to quilt the wishbones all the way till I get to that little V. It allows me to get from point to point and continue on down the border without having to stop or break thread. Sure, when I show it at show and tell at my guild, I'm not going to tell everybody that I did it this way because it's easier, but you know that's why I'm doing it. Now that I'm there, I'm going to advance the quilt so I have more room, and I'm going to quilt another line that angles out towards the edge of my area and start echoing, repeating these same steps until I get back to where I started. So now I have another pointy kind of shape, and then I'm going to go ahead and quilt those wishbones, working my way to the next part. And when I finally approach the end of the area, I'm just going to simply travel along the edge and get back to that starting point. This is what's so great about quilting. You can switch up the design to make it easier. But here's the thing, if I do this design in my vertical borders, I'm going to make sure I do it in my horizontal borders as well. I don't want it to look like I did it because it's easier. I want it to look like I did it because I love the way the design looks. I want to talk real quick about efficient quilting. When I look at my quilt, I'm actually deciding first where I need to end up and then picking the design that makes that happen. If I need to come back to where I'm at, maybe it's a sashing, maybe it's a part of the quilt that I need to come back to this point, I'm going to change the design and make it come back to where I started. And I'm going to do that by quilting double wishbones. Now, that sounds a little scarier than it actually is. I'm just going to start by quilting my first row of wishbones really spread out. I know that eventually I'm going to come back and put another set in here, so I want to leave plenty of room so it doesn't look crazy. Once I get to the end of my area, I'm going to travel along that area and then come back, quilting those spread out wishbones. The main difference is, though, I'm trying to set them in between the ones I previously quilted. Then it gives me a fun, neat design, but most importantly, I end it back where I want to be. Bonus! Now, the wishbones might not be the first thing you think about when you think of a background filler. But here's the thing about that design. It uses the edges of our area as the boundaries. If that area happens to be a rectangular strip, perfect. If it happens to be two wavy lines, it still works. And that's what we're going to do in this panel. Using some of my bigger petals, I'm going to travel around the outside and then fill in that space with the wishbone design. Remembering, as I approach the opposite edge, I'm going to loop back around and go the other way. Once I get to the tippy top, I'm going to use echoing to get to the next big petal and do that all over again. Using this as a filler gives you somewhat the same effect as those back and forth lines as we learned last week. However, it's much quicker to quilt and it's a lot less dense. So this might be for an area where you just want to kind of somewhat smash down the design and let the other thing come through, but you don't want something so dense or so crazy as those back and forth lines. And if you find any petals that you don't want to put wishbones in, just echo inside of them and fill them in, and then move on to the next one. And I'm using this purple thread so you can really see what I'm doing. But when you start quilting your quilt, go ahead and use a matching thread colors. That way you have that nice pop of texture, and your traveling won't show near as much. And you don't have to just use it within the petals either. You can use it to fill in the space between your quilting and the edge of your block as well. So fill the rest of your flower by echoing and quilting wishbones until the whole block is filled in. When you echo the piecing, you're really putting emphasis on the block and the quilt pattern. This is key because if the pattern is the most important thing, you really want to show it off, right? If you watch a Midnight Quilt Show, you might recognize this next quilt. It's called the Braided Star, and it's a free quilt pattern I designed just for the Midnight Quilt Show. I know it's kind of hard to see in this fabric, but in this row of my Braided Star, I quilted an echoed wishbone. I did this for two reasons. That echoing and that wishbone really helped kind of group these two fabrics together, but it also helped separate it from the serpentine lines that were in the strip next to it. Okay, now it's your turn. Go ahead and quilt those wishbones and echoes in the area of your quilt highlighted in red. And if you're feeling up to the challenge, you can try quilting in one of those areas of your flower panel with the wishbone design. And I'll see you next week with the next borders and background video in the Free Motion Challenge Quilting Along. Happy quilting!